My name is Antonio Atalaya, and I work as a clinical advisor for the RN Euro NMD coordination team. I'm pleased to welcome all to this webinar that is organized by the ERN Euro NMD in collaboration with the European Academy of Neurology and the ERN for Rare Neurological Diseases. Today's webinar is about exercise in neuromuscular disorders and will be presented by Nicole Voet. She works in the Rehabilitation Center Klimendal and the Radboud University in Netherlands as a rehabilitation physician, and has done a PhD thesis on aerobic exercise and cognitive behavior therapy in FSHD, a model-based approach that has been awarded the 2017 European Rehabilitation PhD Prize. She's an author of a frequently cited Cochrane review about strength training and aerobic exercise training for muscle disease. She publishes frequently on the subject and is an international expert of FSHD, fatigue, and training on neuromuscular disorders. Thank you, Nicole, for sharing your knowledge today with us, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, okay, thank you for the introduction. And now I'm happy to talk about in the next 60 minutes about exercise in neuromuscular disease, which is a moving topic. And I'm not alone over here. I'm together with a practitioner, Nicholas Valskoch. He has FSHD, and we both believe in a better life for neuromuscular disease patients through more activity, which is what we have both been proven and experienced. And that's what we are going to talk about in the next 50 minutes. And here is a summary of it. We will talk about exercise as being a safe and effective treatment. We will show you as patients and healthcare professionals that exercise is safe and even an effective treatment for people with neuromuscular diseases. But that's not the only thing. We will also share evidence. I will talk about my PhD research and also share practical learnings and tips. And Nicholas will tell about his experience as being a patient and being physically active. And in the end, we will propose a multidimensional model with different types of exercise, different types of individuals, and different types of evidence for each and every one. And this model we will show you now already in the next slide. And you can see over here that there are different factors in the model. And the most important factor is that there are different types of people. There were some questions prior to this presentation who were sent to me. And one question was, can you tell more about this disease? But there are more than 600 different types of disease, of neuromuscular diseases. And I don't think that there will ever be evidence for each type of disease. So we have to take a look into general factors. What factors of exercise can be applied to all the different types of neuromuscular disease. And we have to keep in mind that there are different types of people, which is maybe more important than the different diagnoses. And there are also different types of exercise. I will tell you about different types of evidence. There are also different facilities for everyone in the world. For example, there can be a gym in the neighborhood or not. People can exercise at home or not. But because of time constraints, we will not talk about facilities in this presentation. But what we will do is to propose a multidimensional model. And in the end, there will be 10 minutes for some questions and answers, for which you can use the chat section. And now let's start with the main important thing, that there are different types of people. And as a rehabilitation physician, I see many different types of people in my consulting room. And they may have all a neuromuscular disease, but that doesn't define their personality. And I think that there are more than 600 different types of NMD, but there are billions of personalities. And it's very important for a rehabilitation physician to know which kind of person is sitting in front of you in order to prescribe exercise in the right way. And some people love exercise, some people hate exercise. Patients have a family, patients have a job, and it's very important to know the background of your patient in order to prescribe exercise in the right way. And the next slide shows you that all people have different complaints. And every patient has different complaints. Muscle weakness, of course, is common, and some patients experience severe muscle weakness. Some patients with neuromuscular disease don't experience muscle weakness. But some complaints are common. More than 60% of patients experience a high level of chronic fatigue. More than 80% of patients experience pain. Sleep disturbances are common, and with all that, it's very difficult to be physical active for these patients. And as a rehabilitation physician, I want to take a look at these complaints and what are the causes of these complaints and how can I help people to be physical active. And therefore, the next slide shows you that the research all began with building a model in order to decrease this experience fatigue in these patients. We performed longitudinal research in patients with FSHD to take a look what kind of perpetuating factors are important in experience fatigue, or in other words, what makes that the fatigue doesn't go away. And it appeared that muscle weakness was only an indirect factor. Muscle weakness leads to physical inactivity. For patients with muscle weakness, it's difficult to be physical active. And with that, it leads to fatigue and also to a lower level of social participation. And the second most important factor is pain. And the third most important factor is sleep disturbances. And it all leads to a chronic level of fatigue. And then the next slide, you can see that we will now turn to the practitioner story. And Nicholas will tell you about his experience as having FSHD and trying to be physical active.
Thank you, Nicole. I was diagnosed with FSHD quite a while ago. It was back in 1995 when I was a military medic in the north of Sweden. And I experienced pain in the right shoulder. As you can see on the picture, it was not that strange that I experienced pain in shoulders because the backpacks were rather big, but it was a chronic pain. So I went to the hospital and they started doing all kinds of tests, and they noticed that indeed there was a weakness in the right shoulder, and the pain was mainly caused by the fact that if I wear a heavy backpack, it was pushing on the nerves that were no longer protected by the muscle that wasn't there in the right shoulder. So that is an example of just, you know, how I experienced the starting of the FSHD a while back. Now, that didn't really stop me from being active. This is up to 10 years after I was diagnosed with FSHD in the right shoulder. I didn't have any problems of doing kayak training, even whitewater kayaking in the Alps. So the muscle weakness in this case was very, very local in the right shoulder, and I didn't experience any of the other things in the model that Nicole introduced. Neither did I have any problems in skiing or things like this. There was no other effect above and beyond the right shoulder. Of course, as you can see in the picture on the left, ski touring, I would have to consider how much do I put in my backpack. Can I wear a little bit of a wider straps on the backpack to make sure that there was not pushing on the nerves that were no longer protected by the cap muscle in the right shoulder. But that was about it. Similarly, 40 years earlier, you can see my dad on the picture. He was also an active person then that also enjoyed physical activity, and here he's illustrated on the top of a mountain in the very north of Sweden. He was also active rowing and other things. So the interesting thing back in the days was that none of my parents were proven, you know, to have any kind of signs of FSHD. They did all kinds of tests on both of my mother and my father, but none of them had any signs of FSHD, and they remained very active in an outdoors kind of life. It was only about 10 years later that my dad started really getting lower back weakness. It didn't really stop him from being physically active directly because he still enjoys to be outside. But as you can see, there is no longer skis. It's more a 4x4, and the dog is also enjoying some relaxation. So he remained active and socially active, but he had to alter his type of activities to something that could keep him socially active and outdoors person that he likes to be. Also in this process, he went basically throughout Sweden and internationally to understand what is happening with my lower back, because I never had this problem before. He's also a medical professional, so he really used the network to its maximum. And in the end, it was basically diagnosed with well, this is FSHD, and there's not too much you can do about it. At the same time, I started, well, having a change of life. I moved from the Alps up to Amsterdam. I started a family, and as most fathers of 40 plus having small kids, I experienced lower back pain. But the other thing is I experienced some weakness in my lower back pain. And interesting enough, this coincided with the fact that my dad, well, who is significantly older, had more severe weakness in the lower back, which triggered me to then connect with the network in the medical profession in the Netherlands, and I got very good kinds of different professionals, among others Nicole, and hence our connection. So I had some muscle weakness in my lower back, which also actually turned on to be painful. Maybe more because I then continued living as I wanted to, and then overstretched or overused the muscles that are still there. Physical inactivity is dotted here on the model because I remained physically active, but I really started thinking, okay, well, should I do all of these things? I talked to my friends and said, do you also have back problems? And basically all of them have back problems, but they're all physically active, and they came out with different things. Some were rowing, some were cross-country skiing, some were doing other things. So we tried to figure it out, but I was really happy to get all this support from a network of really good professionals in the Netherlands. So I think this is the beginning of the story, and just showing that you change, maybe your personality is the same, but you have, it evolves over time. So with that, I hand back to, I'll come back to you later and tell you more about the story, because it's not finished yet, but I'll hand over back to Nicole to give her professional view on some of these experiences that we have had as a family.
Yeah, you heard about two different types of people, a father and a son, the same family, but different types of personality, but they both remained active. And when they experienced some muscle pain, they altered both their activities, their level of activity. And it once went wrong with Nicholas. When he was a father, he experienced back pain. He didn't alter his physical activity, but he was able to break a vicious circle of pain and inactivity and be active again. And with that, he showed a very high level of self-efficacy and a high level of coping. And we met each other when he was searching for advice regarding exercise. And you can see, you heard about the factors in the model in the story of the practitioner in the last slides. And now we have heard about different types of personality. We are going to different types of exercise. And there are many different types of exercise. And in the past, not so long ago, patients in hospital were told to stay in bed for days, weeks, even months, were inactive. And for patients with neuromuscular disease, they were told that they are not allowed to exercise, because patients, professionals, and therapists were afraid that exercise would damage muscles of their patients. And it was a pity, because it was based on only a small number of studies and also a small number of patients, and the majority of the studies were animal studies. And happily that changed, because now the evidence for a positive effect of exercise is increasing, just as the number of studies showing that effect. And here you can see at the right some examples of exercise studies. At the left upper corner, a boy with Duchenne muscular dystrophy exercising during the no use is during the no use is disuse study. And as the name of the study already implies, exercising causes a deceleration of the progression of disease in boys with Duchenne. In the left lower corner, you can see patients exercising during the Effects to FSHD exercise trial, which I will tell you later on. And as you can see, for these people, exercising is different. The left upper corner, the boy is exercising with his dad. And at the left lower corner, patients were happy to exercise with each other. They like exercising in a group. And at the right, you can see children with physical disabilities performing martial arts and having fun. So that's the present now. And again, the next slide, it all are individuals. And as a rehabilitation physician, it's again important to see the individual who is in front of you. And while prescribing exercise, you have to prescribe it as it is medicine. Just like medicine, you say what kind of medicine, the amount of milligrams, the frequency, the duration, etc. And here you can see some examples. And of course, there is many evidence of exercise in neuromuscular disease patients, but unfortunately, the evidence of effect for wheelchair-bound patients is very limited. But happily, there are some ways to exercise, and in the left upper corner you see an example of the Top Fit program, a program with videos who can let people exercise at home. And you can see in this slide examples of patients of mine who have a different goal. The patients at the right wanted to walk the Camino, a walkway of more than 800 kilometers from France to Spain, and this patient has myotonic dystrophy. The left lower corner, a patient with hereditary spastic paraparesis who wanted to climb up a mountain in Austria. So what is the goal of your patient? It can be different. And the next slide, when you prescribe exercise, you have to keep in mind that it can be different. And when I prescribe aerobics, for example, it can be performed like the left picture or like the right picture. So the next slide, what is the kind of intensity? And with exercise, there are two main groups. On the one hand, there's aerobic exercise. On the other hand, there's strength training. And aerobic exercise is very important, but because the most evidence which is available is for aerobic exercise in patients with NMD. And keep in mind that patients already are performing top sport in daily life. Daily life activities are already top sport for these patients. And aerobic exercise can be very important because it can increase the anaerobic threshold for your patient. Or in other words, then they can become less of a top sporter in daily life by aerobic exercise. And when you perform aerobic exercise, you have to do it 2 to 3 times a week, at least for 20 minutes, because exercise for less than 20 minutes is not or is limited effective for increasing your anaerobic threshold. And it's important that you gradually increase your intensity. So, in other words, start low and increase very slowly. It's better to begin 3 times a week for 5 minutes and the next week 3 times a week for 7 minutes, then begin already at 20 minutes. Then it still is fun because you are able to increase your workload and you prevent overuse. And first increase your time, then the intensity of your exercise. And how to measure your intensity? Muscle pain is okay. Then something happens in your muscles, but not for longer than 24 hours. And not in that intensity that you cannot perform your daily activities anymore. You can also use the talk test. At the right upper corner, you see a man running a marathon while he's talking to his wife by phone. That's the talk test. When you are exercising and can still talk, then your intensity is not too high. And the last one is the Borg scale. You can see at the right lower corner, a scale from 6 to 20. You can give your intensity a number, and when your number is in between 12 and 16, then your intensity is high enough to be effective enough, but not too high that you are at risk of overuse. And that's about aerobic exercise. And when we are going to strength training, then it's good to know that the evidence for the effect of strength training in neuromuscular disease is limited, but studies show that it is safe, at least when you are performing it at the right level. And when you're performing strength training, you have to focus on the muscles with relatively more strength and muscles who you can use against gravity. For that muscle strength can increase. So it's good to know for a physician prescribing strength training for a patient which muscles are relatively strong and which muscles can be used against gravity. If muscles cannot be used against gravity anymore, then you can still exercise these muscles, but strength will increase limited, and you will only work at your flexibility. And when you perform strength training, perform it as functional as possible. To the right, you see a rugby team performing ballet, and maybe it's a company trip, but I don't think they will perform it every week because it's not functional for them. So ask your patient, ask yourself, what's my goal? And then exercise as functional as possible. And when you are exercising, use a high number of repetitions and low weights, or better, even body weight, to prevent overuse. And I think that there is limited effect of strength training because especially strength training is has to be prescribed individually. It's different for every person, and many studies are very general. So I think that's the reason that the effect for strength training is up till now limited. So let's turn back to the practitioner to hear about his exercises.
Thank you. So indeed, just like Nicole said, when I started realizing my lower back was not as strong as it used to be, I went to a professional physiotherapist, and he advised some of the exercises of which you can see on the left side here, when I basically slowly stretch my legs out and keep the lower back down. And I learned a lot that indeed it helps strengthening that cross-sectional lower back muscle that is indeed was affected by the FSHD in my case. And just like Nicole said, I started off by just moving my legs, not even to the angle that you see here, but in slow repetitions every day on a daily basis. Until now, I'm basically doing 25 to 50 repetitions at a time with the feet all the way down to the floor without moving the back. But it's been a gradual process gaining back my strength and abdominal muscles over time. To give you a point of reference, these are some of the weights that I'm using to train my shoulders. They're 1, 2, and 3 kilos. But I use them for heavy repetitions, and I do also squats at home because I have 2 kids, so I need to be able to do these 15-20 minutes of exercise whenever I have a free moment. I do about 100 squats times 3 with holding on to the 3 kilo weights. Now that's exactly the opposite of what I did 20 years ago. When I was about 20, then I did like 4 to 5 repetitions with 150 kilos on my shoulders. That was fine at that time, but it's no longer fine at this stage. It helped me also get back into sports, and I found out that, hey, rowing is a very good exercise for the type of things that I need to do. So I spent, I think, 6 months almost just training myself up to say, okay, well, now I think my back is strong enough. And I started joining a rowing club in Amsterdam. On the picture, you see the rowing team that I was actually substituting one of the rowers in the middle of the summer. They are the regional amateur champions in North Holland. So I actually substituted the gentleman in the very back there because he was on vacation. Little did I think that, oh, hold on here a second. These guys have won every competition that they've been in, and I substitute the strongest team. They lose, it's going to be my fault. And we lose, so it went fine. It was interesting though that once I went back to the regular visit with one of the doctors, they said, "Oh, but did you tell them that you had a muscular disease?" And I basically said, "Well, no, I didn't even think about that. I was just thinking about winning." So I think it's back to what Nicole was saying. If you train properly and you train regularly, you can gain back good performance, and it's a lot about mentality. But of course, it's no longer about winning in sports. It's actually more about being active and be able to take care of my kids, which is now I'm happy to be able to still do even, but I keep doing my regular exercises. Here you see me with my daughter. At the same time, my dad, as I mentioned before, loves to be active. So he also loves, of course, to see his grandchildren, even though they're a bit far away. But he still sometimes does the things that he also has to do around the cabin in the mountains, which is chopping down large pieces of wood and saw them. As you can see on the picture there, his back is not necessarily in the right ergonomic position, and it's quite heavy. But he still likes to do it, and he does it, and he's quite proud of it. Of course, he's also socially active. Here you see him traveling all the way down to Italy, because the other half of my family is Italian. If you look closely, you see that he's sitting in an electric wheelchair, and he has 2 sticks with him, or 2 walking sticks with him. So when he knows that he's going to go travel somewhere there where there might be longer distances to walk, and longer distances is no longer the mountains that he used to climb in the north of Sweden of 10 and 20 and 30 kilometers walks, they're more like, if it's more than 500 or 1 kilometer, it's good if I have my wheelchair. But it doesn't prevent him in the model from being socially active. So he has muscle weakness. He doesn't necessarily experience physical inactivity, depending on how you look at it. He's not able to do what he used to do before, but he is not socially inactive. So he keeps the motivation high. With that, I hand it back over to Nicole to show a little bit more how that would be visualized in the model of very light and hard and very hard exercise.
Yeah, thank you, Nicholas. And you can see the pictures over here. Nicholas showed you before, and I placed the Borg scale alongside it. And as you can see, father of Nicholas in daily life is relatively inactive, but sometimes he's with a low frequency very active, and then he's at risk of overuse, because the activity he performs over there is a very high activity. So as rehabilitation, when I was should I be his rehabilitation physician, I would say be careful for overuse with this combination of activities. Nicholas, on the other hand, is gradually increasing his exercises, up to rowing again, in a healthy team, in a winning team even. But don't copy it. You are another person, you as a listener. Also be careful, for example, with the exercises Nicholas performs when your back and belly muscles are relatively less strengthful. It's very important to first see a physical therapist and a rehabilitation physician in order to get advice regarding the good level of intensity of exercise. But happily for Nicholas it worked, gradually increasing the level of intensity up till growing again and having a nice level of social participation. And now let's turn to different types of evidence, to the scientific evidence regarding the effect of neuromuscular, the effect of exercise in NMD. You can see are popping up several studies regarding the effect of exercise, and all these studies show a positive effect of exercise. At the left upper corner, you can see the Cochrane review. I've written myself, summing up all that kind of evidence and showing that aerobic exercise, especially in patients with FSHD, is effective, and that strength training is safe, but there is no evidence, at least in the scientific literature, for strength training in patients with FSHD. But I think that Nicholas already showed you that there can be an evidence, at least if you prescribe it well. And now let's turn to one study as an example, the Facts to FSHD study, which was my PhD study, and was about the effect of both aerobic exercise and cognitive behavioral therapy in FSHD. And we invented those types of rehabilitation interventions based on the model, which will pop up now on the slide. The model I showed you before, with the perpetuating factors of fatigue. And both rehabilitation interventions were developed in order to decrease the level of experienced fatigue in patients with FSHD. And the next slide shows you that we managed to do so. As you can see, the results of aerobic exercise over here. The patients who performed aerobic exercise 3 times a week cycling, once a week in a rehabilitation center, twice a week at home for 30 minutes, they showed a reduction of their experienced fatigue with a number needed to treat of only 2.1. Or in other words, 2.1 patient has to cycle to cure one patient of his chronic experienced fatigue. We also saw an increase of physical activity in these patients, and that remained so because when I called them years later after termination of the trial, more than 70% of them indicated that they continued exercising. And that's also my advice. Exercise has to be performed chronically in order to have effect. What we also saw in this group was an increase of isometric quadriceps strength. Or in other words, there is no effect of strength training on muscle strength in these patients, but aerobic exercise does show an effect. Then the other intervention, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, on the next slide. Cognitive behavioral therapy is a therapy given by a psychologist and is directed at the perpetuating factors of fatigue. And the main factor is physical inactivity. And the main aim is to increase the level of physical activity of the patient. And sometimes patients are too active, and then you have to search to a good level of physical activity. And this therapy was also very effective because now we saw a number needed to treat of only 1.3. Or in other words, 1.3 patient has to follow this therapy in order to cure one patient of his experienced fatigue. And we also saw an increase of physical activity, which also remained up to almost 80% of participants continued exercising years after the trial. We saw an increase of sleep quality and an increase of social participation. For example, one patient who had been declared unfit for work was working again after this therapy. And the message of this slide is that physical activity is as important as exercise. But what is the difference? Physical activity you can perform every day. And with physical activity, you are moving your body and you notice that your heart rate is increasing. Exercise, then your heart rate increases and also your breathing frequency increases, and that you can perform 2-3 times a week. But this study shows that physical activity is even as important as exercise. So please keep that in mind. In the trial, we also performed MRI measurements of the upper leg muscles of patients in order to look at an underlying mechanism of effect. And the next slide shows that in the patient, the usual care group, that's the group which received no intervention, we see an increase of fatty infiltration of the upper leg muscles. You can see cross-sectional images of the upper leg muscles, and in gray you can see the muscle tissue, and in white fatty infiltration. And you can see during the trial the fatty infiltration increases. And what did we see in the intervention groups? You can see that in the bars over here. In blue you can see the increase of fatty infiltration in 1 year for the usual care group, which was about on average 6%. After aerobic exercise therapy, the increase was only 2.5%. And after cognitive behavioral therapy, the increase of fatty infiltration was only 2%. So in other words, what the next slide shows you is that both interventions, aerobic exercise and cognitive behavioral therapy, so exercising and increasing physical activity, are able to decelerate the progression of disease because they decelerate the increase of fatty infiltration. So that shows that exercise is medicine. And now it's very important to know, is that only the case for FSHD or for more neuromuscular diseases? And we also built, as the next slide shows you, a model for myotonic dystrophy type 1. And the model was more or less the same. We have to only add reduced initiative to this model and also myotonia. And I will not talk about the study, but I will tell a bit about it, the optimistic study in myotonic dystrophy type 1, which also shows a very good effect of exercise and cognitive behavioral therapy in patients with myotonic dystrophy type 1. So as the next slide shows you, the question, is fatigue a disease specific or a generic symptom in chronic medical conditions? The answer is it's a generic symptom. This article of a group of psychologists in Amsterdam has taken a look, has analyzed many studies regarding fatigue in chronic medical conditions, for example, rheumatoid arthritis, fatigue after cancer, myotonic dystrophy, FSHD, multiple sclerosis. And it appeared that only 10% of fatigue was disease-specific, and 90% of fatigue can be explained by transdiagnostic factors. So in other words, all these patients can benefit from a transdiagnostic fatigue approach, like exercise and cognitive behavioral therapy. So that's very positive for our patients. We don't have to perform trials in every 600 different types of NMD. We can expect that these interventions are effective for both, for all chronic diseases. Okay, and now let's turn to Nicholas again.
Thank you, Nicole. So, indeed, in terms of the type of evidence here, what you see here is my dad recently just walking out in the garden. I asked him to take a picture because he now, when he walks with sticks, and if he doesn't have sticks, you see the position that he has because of the weakness in the lower back muscles. It's noteworthy that indeed, like Nicole said, he's always been biking to work, except for in emergency cases when he has to take the car. But he's always kept very physically active. Unfortunately, he didn't have the great advice from really professional and experienced people with muscular disease like I've had in and around Amsterdam and the Netherlands. So he did quite a lot of walking with sticks, and he also did, like you saw in the picture, some heavy work, which might be one of the reasons why he's now has arthrosis in the shoulders, because he's leaning on the sticks rather than holding it up with the back. But I mean, everyone does as much as they can, and the advice that he got was remain physically active. I think what I want to point out here is a little bit what Nicole was saying, that every person is specific, maybe not the disease, but the personality, and you need to help people understand what is good for you and what could potentially be harmful for you. In the same way, I'm biking with the kids to school. Here I'm on the electric bike. I usually actually don't attach the battery. I just go without, because then I get more exercise, unless I'm really in a rush. So that's the daily exercise that I always get. I bring the kids to school and I pick them up, and I think that helps as well, just to keep my legs active. Of course, it also helps now that I've got a lot of advice. I'm really also thinking about my lower back and how I'm sitting on the bike, and trying to think about those things. Unfortunately, well, I also bike by myself sometimes without the kids. In this case, that was lucky that I biked by myself. I'm still quite strong in my legs, and I biked rather fast and got hit by a truck. Then, of course, broke my right shoulder, the one with FSHD, in 4 beautiful pieces. It was good also then to have the network that I had already, and asking the surgeon to connect with my rehabilitation physician to get the advice on how should we screw the shoulder bones of Nicholas together, and how can we do it without damaging too much of the muscle tissue. So they did an excellent job, and only screwed in 3 places rather than otherwise would have been maybe 6 or 8. Of course, then actually in the same time I was part of the full body MRI scan. And you can see here, well, you can't see it very clearly, but in the top right corner there is my shoulder thing. You can't see anything on the MRI scan because the shoulder is full of screws. There is a small fatty infiltration here, the left side. There is fatty infiltration in the lower back muscles, and there is also quite some fatty infiltration on the hamstrings, and a little bit down in the legs. It seems like everything comes together at the same time, because when I was going for this MRI scan, my parents were by coincidence visiting, and my mom, of all people, noticed, are you limping a little bit with your left foot? I was like, oh, I didn't even think about it. And the reason is probably because there is a little bit more fatty infiltration on the left side. I haven't even noticed, but my mom walking behind me noticed that I was walking a bit strangely. Now, of course, with all of that, I kept doing my exercises like before for the lower back. Of course, with my shoulder broken, this is a picture for later. I couldn't lie with my hands like that, but I had to do it. I slowly started exercising my shoulder. I couldn't row, or at that time, of course, with the shoulder just screwed together. And I noticed that, of course, the muscles get shorter when you've had an operation, and you keep your arm still. So as soon as possible, as the doctor told me that you can now start moving your arm, I started moving my arm. But I also joined my wife on Bikram yoga, which is basically a 90-minute hot yoga session. I've done it before, so I know it, but I had taken a break because in terms of time, I preferred to go rowing on the beautiful Amstel. And I felt that did better for my body at that time. But of course, after the accident, I had to get flexibility back in my shoulder. So I went for this Bikram yoga thinking that, well, maybe I can do some of the positions, but not all of them. To my surprise, I could actually do much, much more than I ever thought I would be able to. There's exercises like this one, of course, I couldn't do fully, but I could do much more than I thought. There are other exercises when you need to stand in your heels with both hands under your heels and stretch your shoulders. It actually worked really, really well, even after the shoulder accident. When I did the revisit recently to the doctor, or actually in December, he told me he'd never seen anyone recover so quickly from a shoulder operation that I did. And it's quite remarkable that it happened even since I have FSHD in exactly that shoulder. So I think I must have done something right. He also told me you should not go skiing. I'm a little bit of a rebel, so I didn't quite listen to him. So I went skiing anyway. This is in late January. My shoulder was broken in middle of October. I think it shows to tell that if you're convinced that you should be able to get back into shape, it is absolutely possible. And even with fatty infiltration in your legs, you can ski. You just need to make sure that you're not putting over strain on the muscles, but you train up slowly to get back into shape.
Thank you, Nicholas. And happily you didn't get a skiing accident.
Cars are hard, snow is soft.
Yeah, okay. And as you maybe will understand that even though Nicholas even surprised me, as you saw his MRI pictures, and maybe you saw these pictures before you met Nicholas, you didn't match them together. That triggered me also, because Nicholas is very active and shows that how much can be performed while having FSHD. And why is the exercise, especially in FSHD, so effective? And I think that epigenetics is lying behind that effect. And epigenetics is different from genetics, because epigenetics is happening during life. And epigenetics controls genes. Or in other words, it affects how genes are read by cells and if relevant proteins are produced. In FSHD, there is a toxic protein for the muscle cells. And maybe exercise affects the production of that toxic protein. And epigenetics, it is everywhere. It's about food, quality of sleep, exercise, and maybe you recognize the factors of the model I showed you before. They are epigenetic factors. And they can all influence the production of proteins. And in healthy people, we know that physical exercise causes a change in methylation of the DNA, and with that, a positive effect on muscle repair and growth, and also an increase of type 1 muscle fibers. And maybe that's also the case for patients with FSHD and the underlying effect of exercise. And epigenetics, it makes us unique, even twins. You also see 2 patients with FSHD in one family who are both unique, and so is every person unique. So that also matches with my opinion that every person is unique. And we want to prove this by performing research in the near future. We want to repeat both rehabilitation interventions, exercise and cognitive behavioral therapy in FSHD, and perform a muscle biopsy prior to and after an increase of physical activity to take a look at epigenetic factors. Do we see a change in epigenetic factors? Do we see a change in methylation as the explanation of the effect in FSHD? So with that, we are going to an end of the presentation. And to sum up, we've told about different types of people, which is the most important thing, in my opinion. I've showed you that there are different types of exercise, so keep that in mind while prescribing or performing exercise. And please also keep in mind that you are exercising at the right level of intensity. And Nicholas showed that when you are adjusting your level of intensity properly, then it's okay. But please be careful of overuse and use the aids that there are aids like walking sticks, like rehabilitation physicians, in the right way. I also showed you different types of evidence because of time constraints, only one study, but there is many evidence regarding the effect of exercise. Unfortunately, we couldn't talk about facilities and networks, but maybe we can show later on what facilities can do, and also how important international networks are in exercise, because we have to share each other's knowledge, each other's studies and results in order to perform exercise in the right way. And that sums up to a multidimensional model, which can be used while prescribing exercise. And before I get into questions and answers, another sum up, but maybe the multidimensional model will solve the puzzle of fatigue and pain and muscle weakness in our patients. So to end, what did we talk about? We talked about exercise as being a safe and effective treatment. We shared evidence, practical tips, and I proposed a multidimensional model. And I'm very curious, what do you think about this model? Do you think it's applicable for each and everyone, and that persons are maybe more important than different types of disease? So that brings us, after almost 50 minutes, to the last slide. We want to thank the organization for letting us able to present this topic to you. I see that there are almost 100 participants, and I know that my team is in the theater, so that sums up to more than 100 participants, and that's very nice. And the presentation, you can also listen to it afterwards, as it will be available at the website. And as we promised you, there's now some time to answer questions. And I see that there are already 5 of them in the question and answer section.
So thank you very much, Nicole and Nicholas. I thought that your presentation was very clear, and that's usually a sign of very good quality, because the problems that you've talked about are very complex. And indeed, we have at least 4 questions. I have a question from a patient with myasthenia gravis, saying that my exercise is always with enough breath to talk, short in duration, low intense according to work. Unfortunately, by increasing time, I have to strongly reduce my daily activities and have muscle soreness for 72 hours. And medication adaptations did not change this. And she's asking for any advice regarding this.
Yeah. This patient sums up the factors of which you can see the intensity of exercise and if she is overusing or not, or he. And what is important to know is that he or she has muscle soreness for more than 72 hours. So the exercise intensity is too high. She says the Borg scale is okay. It's short in duration, but my advice is to lower the level of intensity and to increase the time. And I don't know which exercises she's performing now, but take a look if it's possible to lower the exercise intensity up till a level that your muscle soreness is not more than 24 hours. And also that you are still able to practice your daily activities. For you, maybe it's difficult because you say, I'm not sure in duration, the Borg scale is okay. Please lower your intensity of exercise up till the level that your muscle soreness is not more than 72 hours. And the other advice is to take a look, what kind of activities are you performing alongside your exercises? Maybe you are just like the father of Nicholas, an activity in the forest, and is that too intense, to give an example? So take a look at the other activities you perform, and maybe you can change some of them in order to decrease your muscle soreness.
So, Anita, I don't know if you have the mic open, if you want to ask anything else.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. I did this already, and unfortunately, my support on the electrical bike is as high as possible. So probably I can only reduce the time or the daily activities. Yeah.
And did you try to include short breaks into your activity or do your exercises?
But I was suggested to do a minimum of 20 minutes in the exercise. And when I include the short breaks, I also reduce my fatigue, my muscle soreness. But I wasn't able to increase the duration of cycling.
Okay, yeah, and maybe it is difficult for you to exercise at least 20 minutes, and then you have to keep in mind the exercise guidelines that are existing now, that are written recently, which tell that keep in mind that every form of exercise and activity is okay for patients. So if you don't manage to reach the 20 minutes, then think about 10 minutes is okay too, and maybe that's okay, and will have you experience less muscle soreness.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so now I call on Pierre Carrier. He's a professor of neuroradiology, and he wants to do some comment on your MRI slide, I believe. So if Nicholas can put it back. Pierre?
Yes, I'm here. Do you hear me?
Yeah. Yes, perfectly.
Okay. Well, congratulations for this very interesting webinar. It was very clear, and I would say with an optimistic view and a very positive view on what we can do. I just have a comment and a question on the use of quantitative MRI in the context of an exercise, a chronic exercise. You nicely reported that the FSHD patient after exercise has a lesser increase in fat fraction than the patient who did not go to the, this exactly this one, yes. You have to know that the fat fraction is a ratio between the fat component and the water, means the muscle component. So in the specific context of an exercise protocol, one possible explanation for a decrease in fat fraction is in fact that what you see is a reflection of an increase in muscle mass due to the exercise protocol itself. It does not automatically imply that you have slowed down the muscle destruction by disease. So it is, I think, an important point to consider. And one way to sort it out is to go back to the water and the fat image and to try to do some measurements on the fat content and the water content. And by doing so, I think that you can get some important additional information on the real effect of the intervention. Did you think about it, or did you do it?
Yeah, thank you for your interesting question. And we did look into detail if we saw a decrease of fat or an increase of muscle, but it was a deceleration of the increase of fat and not an increase or a relative increase of muscle. And there was also one muscle, the adductor muscle, who showed a decrease of fat. So not only a deceleration, but also a decrease of fat. So to answer your question, it was a decrease of fat more than an increase of muscle. And I told shortly about the optimistic study, which is about the effect of exercise in myotonic dystrophy type 1. And we also performed MRI measurements in that study. And in myotonic dystrophy type 1 patients, we saw an increase of muscle. So that's the other way around. An increase of muscle was the cause of a deceleration of the increase of fat. Okay, so it's not, the mechanism is not the same for every type of disease.
Okay, very interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. I now see the next question, the effect of Harmon-Rijn-gout, the effect of exercise in dysferlionopathy patients. There have been some indications that exercise has a negative effect on muscle, and I don't know if this person is unmuted now, so he can maybe tell more about maybe the underlying study of this effect.
Yes, it's unmuted now. You can talk, please.
Yes, I'm sorry, I have to be quick because I have another meeting after this. But I guess that Pierre also can take over when I have to leave. But this is a question. There have been some data. I don't think if they haven't been published yet. We're working on that data, and we wanted to know because you have shown there a nice slide with a lot of publications of exercise. I don't know if they were 100% positive, or if there was at least one that said that there was a negative effect. But there have been some data in our database where we see that there might possibly be a negative effect of exercise on the muscle in dysferlinopathy patients, meaning that if they go back to the history of these subjects and those that have had a very intensive regime of exercise, that there was a correlation that they had accelerated increase in muscle degeneration or increase in fat fraction if we talk about MRI data. So I just wanted to know if you have any vision on that.
Yeah, thank you also for your question and mentioning this study. And I'm curious to see it published, hopefully recently, or hopefully quick. And of course, because you said it was a very intensive way of exercise, and patients and healthy people still have to be careful during exercise because it still can damage muscle. Of course, my story and that of Nicholas was very positive, but you still can damage muscles. And for example, the cyclists in the Tour de France have muscles that looks like a patient with inflammatory muscle disease. They also damage their muscles, but after they rest, their muscles are able to heal again. And maybe for patients it's different. So I'm curious to that study and to the methods. Maybe it can learn us about what is too high intensity or too high duration in order to prescribe exercise in the right way for patients.
Okay, thank you. Well, we can maybe if it's not going to be published next week, but and I'm not sure if we're going to emphasize this particular aspect of the effect of exercise on muscle, but we can maybe discuss this later on once it's out out there on the internet, and maybe we can discuss this together. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
If I may, Pierre Carrier again, if I may just pop in for 1 second, and it might be specific to the dysferlinopathy, which is a particular disease which is mainly a membrane repair defect. But there is at least one publication. I mean, it's not the end of the story, but it's in GNNP in 2018, and title is kind of clear and provocative, that it says that teenage exercise is associated with earlier symptom onset in dysferlinopathy, a retrospective, that's a problem, cohort study. So there's some indication that, at least for some disease, but I guess also for all disease, I mean, exercise is good. Nobody would argue against that. The problem is how far to go and how to avoid overuse. And I think it's particularly critical for all NMDs and particularly extremely critical for some NMDs. And maybe if I can turn it into a question, I mean, how can we now in the future better appreciate, you know, it's like if we were on a bell shape, you know, to put ourselves on the top of the bell and to avoid, you know, falling in the drawback of exercise.
Yeah, and I think, thank you. I think the answer to the question is to start low. Start low and increase slow, because then you will start at then the risk of getting off the belly is low. And when you start low and increase slow and are looking for signs of overuse, then I think you can prevent overuse. I think that's the answer. And also to share knowledge internationally, because when we share studies and share results, but also clinical experience and experience from patients, we can share experience in exercise. I think that's important too.
Okay, so the next question links with this one is about DMD and exercise. I suppose that you've answered that or not?
Could you comment on the particular case of DMD, where lack of dystrophin could make muscle fibers more sensitive to exercise? Yeah, like DMD and the disease which was called previously, when there is a lack of dystrophin, people have a higher risk of damage by overuse. So exercise can be safe for these patients, but patients have to be more careful than other patients and take a look at muscle damage. But for these patients also start low and increase steadily. And also, just like Nicholas, when something is happening or your disease is getting worse, adjust your level of exercise intensity. And maybe it's also positive to adjust your level of exercise intensity to a lower level, because healthy people in the majority increase their level of exercise intensity, but you have to do it in order to prevent overuse. Yeah.
And there's a linked question from Sarah Chopra. I'm going to unmute her, or you. And it's about the strategy of stretching exercises for prevention of contracture in DMD. So, Nicole, do you want to answer?
I thought maybe the person who asked the question wants to add something. Otherwise, I would answer the question. The strategy for mitochondrial muscle disease. We know in mitochondrial muscle disease that in that disease, high intensity exercise, it could be effective more than in other muscle diseases. Maybe it's some kind of contradictory, because there's a problem with mitochondria and high intensity exercise is effective. But we know from research that high intensity exercise is effective for these patients, also aerobic exercise, and just like the guidelines I gave you in this hour. But for this disease, you can also take a look at high intensity exercise, but please don't start it alone. Search for a physical therapist, a rehabilitation physician, or a neurologist with experience in exercise and mitochondrial muscle disease.
I don't know if Sarah wants to talk, is unmuted. So he asks also about strategy for mitochondrial muscle disease.
The next question is about videos for patients to exercise at home. And yeah, we are now living in a strange world because of the COVID epidemics. And for the patient organization in the Netherlands, I prepared a webpage with exercises for neuromuscular disease patients, also in English. What I can do is share the page maybe to your NMD so that they can place it on the website. What I'm also planning to do is creating a website or a possibility for patients to exercise at home. So now I can share some videos which are already available, but know that I'm preparing to create a website or a possibility for patients to exercise at home.
Excellent. Last question is about respiratory muscle training. Do you recommend it?
I recommend respiratory muscle training. I didn't talk about it in this hour, but I recommend it. Aerobic exercise itself is already a form of respiratory muscle training. I have patients who are playing an instrument, and that's also good for your lungs. But I do recommend respiratory muscle training. If you want to do it the right way, you can maybe search for a muscle center in a hospital where they can perform measurements of your respiratory muscle function in order to advise respiratory muscle training in the right way. For example, do you have to exercise your inspiratory muscles or your expiratory muscles? But I do recommend it, and know that aerobic exercise is also good for your respiratory function.
Okay, so this is now long but very enjoyable, and I think that we have a very nice communication. Thank you to Nicole, Nicholas, thank you to all the attendants that have put questions and made comments, and thank you everybody, and see you soon in a webinar from our Euro NMD network. Bye now.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.